Hello everyone, we're consultants for sustainability. But first and foremost, we want to thank all of you for attending our Executive Technology Summit. Sitting in this room are leaders all across the technology industry. We have representatives from companies like Microsoft, Amazon, OpenAI, and many more sitting right here in this room. Thank you so much for being here. So what are we here to talk about? We're here to talk about artificial intelligence, otherwise known as AI. It's also no secret that AI is everywhere. Every news article, every Wall Street Journal, every headline always seems to talk about something relating to AI. We even have some experiences here.
Personally, I've completed hiring assessments for a specific position within a company.
And just on the way here, we took an Uber, and we know that Uber uses AI to pick the optimal driver for you.
AI really is everywhere. Businesses and everyday people are flocking to it. It's part of the reason why experts think the global market cap will hit $1.6 trillion by the year 2030. Businesses love it, people love it, so what's the problem? Let's take a look at what top tech executives such as Elon Musk think. Elon Musk thinks AI could eventually lead to the end of humanity. Not just that, Elon Musk, along with other top tech executives such as Steve Wozniak, have called for a 6-month pause on all AI development. Our team thinks that is not the path forward. We see that AI has a path forward to improve society and address its needs. And you can't just put a pause on that. Your company understands that. So, what's the dilemma? We want to focus on problems that are occurring right now inside artificial intelligence. AI bias. AI bias exists, and it is currently affecting marginalized communities. So, our team came up with a 4-part framework that promotes inclusion and mitigates the risk of AI bias within your models. Additionally, it also targets the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which is reducing inequality within and among countries. So with that, let's go over an agenda so we can see what we will be discussing today. First, we'll go over a background so you can understand what artificial intelligence is and what AI bias entails. Then we'll talk about the legal implications of this issue. Next, we'll talk about the framework that our team has developed. After that, we'll talk about the financial and ethical implications. Finally, we'll discuss an implementation so you can see how your companies can implement our framework. With that, I'll pass it back to Nabil to discuss the background.
Thank you, Joe. So for our presentation, you really need to understand what AI and AI bias is. So, what is AI? To put it very simply, AI is a computer simulated to simulate human decision-making. Essentially, AI utilizes something called training data to prime itself to do things a human would normally do. So, what is AI bias? Like what we talked about, in order to create an AI, you need to use something called training data. Training data primes your AI to make human decisions. Sometimes there can be problems in that training data. There can be inaccuracies, biases. Issues in that training data result in discriminatory decisions within that AI. This whole dilemma is what we call AI bias. So, what causes AI bias? Like I just said, AI bias is rooted in training data. And there are 2 elements within training data that cause AI bias. The first being, your training data is unrepresentative of reality. What that means is your training data has some sort of inaccuracy. For example, let's say I want to create an AI that is able to distinguish pictures of dogs and cats. But instead, I decide to feed it data. I'm priming my AI with pictures of hedgehogs. Obviously, when I show this AI a picture of a cat or a dog, it's going to make mistakes because the data it's being trained on is inaccurate. The second reason training data can have issues is the training data is reflective of existing prejudices. For example, you utilize historical data that is embedded with bias. A good example of this is the technology industry. The technology industry is notorious for being rooted within gender discrimination. If you decide to develop an AI hiring algorithm and you use workforce data from the technology sector, it will inevitably be rooted in gender discrimination. So, now that we understand AI and AI bias, I'm going to hand it off to Joe to talk about some of the big players within AI.
Thanks, Nabil. In order to get a big picture look at what the AI field looks like today, we need to know what the big players are doing. First, there's OpenAI. You might have heard of it. They were founded in 2015 by Sam Altman. Their products include GPT-3 and the newly released GPT-4, and ChatGPT, which is based on these GPT models. They are receiving heavy funding from tech giants such as Microsoft. Then there's Meta. Meta has various AI projects, such as a chatbot and also something called Llama, which was recently inadvertently leaked online. Next, there's Amazon. Amazon has multiple AI products that they actually sell to other businesses in order they can better optimize their business practices. Finally, there's Microsoft. Among other aspects, Microsoft is heavily assisting with OpenAI to integrate their GPT models within existing Microsoft products. Now I'll hand it back to Nabil to talk about the legal impacts on this issue.
Thank you, Joe. So when looking at the legal environment, well, there really isn't much there. But there is one law that stands at the focal point of AI. That law being the New York City AI law. In New York City, there's an agency called the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. This agency is tasked with ensuring the workforces in New York City are discrimination-free. This agency has decided to take a look at AI decision tools within the business realm. Oftentimes, businesses use AI for a wide range of reasons. One of the most common reasons being candidate selection. In New York City, they decided to take these AI tools that companies are using and subject them to bias audits. What is a bias audit? A bias audit takes your AI and it puts it through a series of reviews and tests to determine, is this AI discriminatory or is it not? Once we get all that data, what this New York law does after is it sends it to the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, a federal agency in charge of discrimination laws. After this whole process is done, all this information from this whole law gets public. But this is just a law that's in contention, right? When is this law going to actually be enforced? When are we going to see the impacts of this law? And if anyone knows Congress, Congress is very, very slow. And if anyone knows anything about technology, technology is very, very fast. Oftentimes, Congress just can't keep up with technology, right? So what are we thinking? 5 years? 2 years from now? 1 year from now? This law will be enforced in New York City 2 days from now. On April 15th in 2023, all companies in New York City utilizing an AI tool of any sort will be required to adhere to the law we just talked about. What does this mean for everyone in this room? We're making a prediction that more laws are to come. At the federal level, the state level, this New York City law is just the beginning. To be a leader in confronting AI bias, to really stand out as a sustainability leader, everyone in this room has an opportunity to leverage their platform and truly confront AI bias. So, now that we understand this, let's talk about our solution. How can you go about confronting AI bias? Our solution entails a 4-part framework. So, first and foremost, our framework recommends every company set a set of requirements. In other words, standards that your AI algorithm needs to follow. Then, conducting an audit, particularly a third-party quarterly audit. Within that audit, there are some calculations that need to be made. You need to calculate a selection rate and an impact ratio. These numbers will be crucial in determining whether your AI is discriminatory or not. At last, we have a reassessment period. When reassessing your framework, you need to determine, okay, is my AI, does it have adverse impacts? Does it not? And what are the steps to take after that? Let's take a deeper look into the requirements. First and foremost, you need to have diversity within your own company. If you expect your product to exhibit diverse features and be inclusive, it only makes sense that your engineers, your machine learning team, your business administration staff is diverse. If you want diverse perspectives to be reflected, your staff should be diverse. Next, involve your end users. The end users of AI come from a wide range of backgrounds and perspectives. By incorporating their feedback and really learning from them, and incorporating that into your development phase, you can really embrace the idea of diversity and inclusion. At last, transparency. Data transparency, privacy laws, this is a whole nother issue. We believe that it is ethical to be transparent with your data. Hence why we want to make all the records in this process available to the public. So, what does an audit entail? The idea of a bias audit is a very, very new concept. In fact, these 3 companies, Parity, Orca, and Babel, have recently developed services in response to this New York City law. In other words, this is a very rapidly changing service. We predict that new companies will be offering these services as the legal environment continues to change. And to summarize, things like Parity, Orca, and Babel will take your AI and determine whether it's discriminatory. So, we've been talking about selection rates and impact ratios for a bit now. But what are these terms, right? We're going to walk through an example where we actually calculate them. So, we want to calculate the selection rate for a specific category. Our target category will be, let's just say, for the sake of this presentation, candidates with brown eyes. So, let's say people are applying to this job, and this company is using an AI to determine who moves forward in the process and who doesn't. So, out of 100 candidates that apply, 100 candidates with brown eyes, 40 of them move forward in the process. So, we take this ratio, divide it, and there we go. Our selection rate for brown-eyed candidates is 40%. We're going to take this number and use it to calculate our impact ratio. So, we have our selection rate for brown-eyed candidates, our target category, and we're going to divide that by the selection rate of the most selected candidate group. For the sake of this example, it's going to be candidates with blue eyes. We divide that, and we have this number, 50%. 50% is our impact ratio. This number is vital in determining whether this AI is discriminatory or not. If your impact ratio is over 80%, you pass the test. There is no sort of significant adverse impact in your algorithm. If it's under 80%, well, you failed the test. And there is some sort of significant adverse impact that needs to be addressed. If it's under 50%, well, there's some sort of severe adverse impact. And to be quite frank, someone should probably get fired. So, what do you do if you fail? First and foremost, those 3 requirements we talked about, we advise that your company goes back to those requirements and really checks and audits. Are we meeting these requirements? If even that fails, we recommend a fail-safe option, utilizing synthetic data. What is synthetic data? Synthetic data is the idea of manually crafting your data set, manually crafting your training data to prime your AI. Instead of using real data, it's purposely pinpointing and selecting certain data points to ensure it's reflective of the diversity of society. However, this is a fail-safe. We have a warning. If this is done wrong, if this process isn't really inclusive of all the diverse perspectives, there's a possibility that you could add new bias to this idea. Hence why we really want to emphasize those 3 key requirements that we mentioned earlier. Now I'm going to hand it off back to Joe to talk about some of the financial implications.
Thanks, Nabil. So we've already mentioned that businesses and users are flocking to AI. It only makes sense that the financial sector is doing just the same. Unfortunately for your companies, that doesn't always translate to opportunities to invest. Let's take a look at Google. Google had a press conference for their new AI chatbot, Bard. Bard made an error, a factual error in the press conference when users prompted the model. That resulted in over $100 billion of market cap being erased in just a few hours after that press conference. What does this show us? It shows us that while there are huge sums of money to be made in artificial intelligence, there are equal amounts to be lost. That's why we've dubbed this the new corporate space race. Take a look at this timeline. In November of 2022, OpenAI instructed their employees to create a new chatbot titled Chat with GPT within just 2 weeks. A few days later, Meta unveiled their model. It was taken offline just days later because of, you guessed it, errors. Just 13 days after OpenAI instructed their employees to create a chatbot, it was released and taken online. Fast forward just a few short months, in January of 2023, ChatGPT already hits 100 million users, becoming the fastest ever tech platform to achieve such a feat. Then, as we mentioned, in February of this year, Google unveils Bard. And finally, in March, Microsoft unveils AI integration in Bing. What does this show? It shows that AI companies are racing to release their models before anybody else can. Take another example. There was a New York Times article that unveiled a quote from a Microsoft tech executive, Sam Schillis. He said it would be a fatal error to be worried about things now that can be changed later. By turning AI development into a race, AI companies are opening the door for massive financial liabilities, both in the short and long term. Let's pivot. Asimov's first law of robotics. In 1942, Asimov said robots shall not cause harm. And a question my team and I have been asking ourselves is, Well, what does happen when robots cause harm? We've already been talking about it. Robots that are acting on behalf of your company are making decisions on their own that are causing real harm to real people and real groups of people. This is a massive financial liability for your companies. It's a growing legal environment, but let's take a look at one specific example. Workday got hit with the first ever AI discrimination lawsuit in the United States. They're utilizing a tool in the hiring process that prematurely screened out marginalized groups before a human even came across their application. Now, the lawsuit has not been taken to trial yet or been settled, but the putative class is seeking compensatory, monetary, and punitive damages. Combine that with the fact that in 2022, just the top 10 EEOC discrimination lawsuits totaled to nearly $600 million in litigation fees. Your company could stand for financial catastrophe if you don't address bias in your AI models. There are also ethical considerations that we need to talk about. I'm passing it over to Nathan to discuss those.
Thanks, Joe. So when it comes to the ethical considerations of our solution, first, we would like to establish a rule that states that it is unethical to ignore AI bias as this propagates existing social biases. In addition to this, we took a look at a lot of the tech industry's key values, some of those being respect for users, accountability, long-term thinking, and being impact-driven. And these values were upheld by tech giants such as Google, Microsoft, Amazon, and the neuro company OpenAI. Despite these values being upheld or attempted to be upheld, we've been shown time and time again that AI bias is a real problem and that AI bias causes real harm. However, we believe that with the implementation of our framework, we can eliminate AI bias and help these companies when it comes to adhering to the industry's key values. Allow me to show you why. Respect for users. Our solution is a policy that accounts for diverse perspectives. By reducing social bias and straying away from the social inequalities that we see today, we believe that we can help incorporate a diverse set of perspectives into AI. Accountability. We believe that by offering quarterly audits as opposed to something like an annual audit, we're able to keep a close eye on the AI tools that these companies are using and make sure that they're adhering to our framework. Long-term thinking. We believe that our solution is reactive for long-term sustainability. Not only will the implementation of our solution reduce social inequalities now and give people better opportunities in the present, but it will also, as long as it's kept in place, continue to discourage a lot of the social biases that we currently see. Impact-driven. Finally, our solution is impact-driven since it maximizes the overall good for society. By substantially decreasing the inequalities that we see today, we're able to give people more opportunities and create a net positive in society. And now I'd like to pass it back to Joe, who will talk about our sustainable development goal.
Thanks, Nathan. So clearly, our team thinks our solution will help your company achieve its long-term goals. But we also believe our framework will help the world achieve its collective goals. As we mentioned previously, the UN outlined their Sustainable Development Goals, and our solution targets goal number 10 specifically, which is reducing inequality within and among countries. How does it do that? Let's take a look at a very concrete example. As we've mentioned, the hiring process is a sector where AI is used frequently. In the modern world, there are existing biases such as gender and racial discrimination that exist outside of AI models. The use of artificial intelligence provides a massive opportunity for both your company and society as a whole. However, the use of an AI model that contains bias can only serve to exacerbate these issues that already exist. If you implement our framework, you can all but eliminate bias in your AI models, which leads to better decision-making that will be much more impartial than any human or group of humans could wish to make. So how does this specifically address the UN framework? Well, let's look at what their framework entails. 10.1, it encourages income growth of low-income individuals. 10.2, our solution promotes inclusivity for all. 10.3, our solution ensures equal opportunity for everybody. And finally, 10.4, our solution ensures social protection for greater equality. And with that, I'd like to hand it over to Esteban to talk about how your company can implement our solution.
Thank you, Drew. So how can you all, as executives of significant tech companies such as Google, Meta, and Amazon, realistically implement our recommendations? To begin implementing our recommendations, we created a plan to action. And this includes 4 simple but useful steps in order to implement our recommendations. Beginning with the first step, which is simply to embrace our 4-part framework into your current bylaws. Within this step, it is just expected for your company to update your current bylaws and embrace our 4-part framework. Following this is your company is expected to conduct quarterly audits with third-party companies. Following this is to make the results from those third-party company audits public to increase transparency. Following this third step is to finally reevaluate, and this reevaluation process is included within the selection rate and impact ratios that we mentioned earlier. Here is a one-year timeline that we created for your companies to simulate and in order to better implement our recommendations. To begin, our timeline is based off the enactment of the New York City AI law, as it's the first of its kind, which begins on April 15th, 2 days from now. From that time period to May 31st, we expect your company to have modified its bylaws to embrace our 4-part framework and go ahead and implement it into your coding and writing as best as possible. From that period on forward, within that month gap from May 31st to June 31st, we also expect that a third-party auditor is selected in order to provide quality feedback in regards to any AI bias that you might find. From that period on to August 1st, which is the day, we expect audits to be ran for any AI-dependent services that your company offers. From that month on forward, we expect all the audits to be publicized. And from that time on forward to November 1st, we expect a planning process in order for 3-month audit cycles to be ran. And these 3-month audit cycles are serving a purpose in order to respond to failed impact ratios that were mentioned earlier and the overall reassessment period, increasing diversity, and responding to any outside variables such as maybe changing the third-party auditor for better quality. To summarize, our problem can be stated as simply AI bias can potentially result in discrimination towards marginalized groups. And to summarize our recommendation, it's our 4-part framework, which simply entails the requirements that we stated earlier, the auditing process, the calculations regarding the auditing process, and then the reassessment period as well. Thank you all for your time, and any questions?
Anna, do you have any questions for these consultants?
I do actually. Great presentation. First question, so if I am implementing this 4-part framework in my company, what is the bottom line going to be in terms of how much it's going to cost me?
That's a great question. So currently, since it's such a new field, we don't have an exact figure for you. But as we have been stating, the legal environment is constantly adapting. We think there's going to be more companies that are offering these auditing services, which will drive the cost down. And at the end of the day, your company can't afford litigation. Facebook had a similar lawsuit where they had to pay out $400 billion in a class action lawsuit. We expect the litigation fees to be very similar if it's carried out on a wide scale. So the bottom line is, your company may be hit with these AI discrimination lawsuits if you don't implement our framework, but we don't have an exact figure on how much the auditing services might cost because it's such a new field.
Thank you.
Is the new policy in New York City or New York State, the whole state of New York?
New York City.
Okay. And that is the only legislation in the country? Well, as a executive in California, then why will I be motivated if there is no legal framework? What are the repercussions for my business?
We would like to frame this as an opportunity for you to be a leader in this scenario. While we said New York City is the first law, we're predicting that this is the first law but not the last law. There will be many, many more laws to come. Everyone knows Congress isn't the fastest. It's only a matter of time as technology continues to progress and Congress catches up that we believe and we predict that this will be federal legislation very, very soon. So by adopting our framework and being a leader now, you're going to be ahead of the game for the future.
Is there any program on my iPhone that wouldn't be covered under this New York bureaucracy law?
So the New York City law largely is concerned around business operations. So it's concerned around mitigating AI bias in the context of a business. Specifically with this law, it's looking at candidate selection. So hiring, firing, promoting, as that's one of the most common usages for AI in business. In terms of your day-to-day AI utilization, we do predict that laws are to come, but our framework specifically is targeting businesses. And when businesses modify the way they go about AI, in turn, it should communicate with that to you, with the end user. And in turn, by a business practicing, safe AI, being transparent, maintaining those requirements, you shouldn't see something crazy like an AI tracking your data and outputting something, maybe a little biased. So we're hoping the effect comes from the top and then trickles down.
So why would I want my competitors to see the results of my internal audits?
Largely because we believe it is ethical to be transparent with your data. If the public isn't aware of how you're going about your AI model, it is simply unethical. It's universally agreed upon that people like to see how their data is being used.
And to add on to that, the AI field specifically is a largely collaborative industry. You can go on OpenAI and you can actually get their data set and tweak it, do whatever you want with it. Most companies are very open source when it comes to their artificial intelligence, and this stems from the fact that this is a very existential issue. As our team mentioned, we think that this has the opportunity to drive social good, but could also be very catastrophic. So it's in the industry's best interest to act collectivist, right? It'll improve everybody's AI models in the end by being transparent and sharing the results of your audits with everyone.
That's pretty good. Are you good? So, I came out of the recruiting software industry, and so it's how is AI bias different from implicit bias? Because I would think that some of, as I understand it, implicit bias means you don't even know that you're discriminatory, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So
In AI bias and
is it how does it differentiate between AI bias from implicit bias?
I'd say that they don't differentiate to an extremely large degree. I would say that I think that the reason we're targeting AI bias is because it's more easily controllable than something like implicit bias. Because AI bias is it's hard coded, and it's more obvious how you can kind of undo that sort of thing by using synthetic data or having a diverse team of engineers on a project. And I think that's the key difference. How easy it is to, not that it's easy, but how relatively easy it is to undo and looked at compared to implicit bias.
And also to add on to that, implicit bias and AI bias sometimes and all the time often go hand in hand. For example, we talked about historical data and how historical data can have biases in that. Oftentimes, when you collect from a data set, there are some implicit things that you won't even notice, but that doesn't mean those implicit things can't be harmful. So when those implicit things go into your AI and go into a training set, that AI becomes primed with implicit bias. So that's why, like Nathan said, AI bias, it can sometimes be hand in hand depending on the specific scenario, but AI bias is kind of like the overarching. Yeah.
So my next question is for you. So if you wanted to sell this to my organization, where organizationally, who would own this project? Would it be the legal team? Would it be the HR team? Would it be the diversity team? Where in the organization would this fit?
The whole organization.
I know,
So-
but who would own the project? Because the department has to own the project.
Yeah. We would say that this would largely be a task for largely the HR to monitor like DEI and such, but while they're leading the task, you really want to emphasize that the whole company plays some sort of part, because you can't really embrace the idea of diversity if only some people are working on it. So by having this idea embedded within, like we talked about earlier, your machine learning team, your business administration team, as long as everyone's on the idea of we want a diverse range of perspectives, we want to implement that in everything we do, not just AI, but everything we do, then we're on track.
You mentioned the first step in this process is having a diverse staff. where I work, unfortunately, that's just not the case. We're not diverse in a lot of ways. Would that present an issue with us moving forward on this process? And are there additional steps we have to take since we're, for example, where I work with a lot of men. So, we can't go out and hire more women, but, before we start this process. So how would we get around that?
So this is largely rooted in the idea of really embracing diversity within your entire corporate framework, right? So not just technology, but law, so many industries are ridden with all sorts of skews in diversity and such. We really recommend that when embracing the idea and those requirements we talked about, not really just pinpointing it towards a single department, but the overarching goal of the company, right? Embracing this idea of a company needs to be diverse. And so really going about, who are our end users? These are what our end users' perspectives are. Now we see all these perspectives, we have a list. Are these perspectives represented in our own team? And if we see, maybe that doesn't match up, it's time to go and reassess and make sure that everyone feels like they're properly represented.
Anybody else? I'm still a little confused about what this covers. And if it's as simple as putting in place a rule that our company won't discriminate, why do we have to do anything more?
So a big part of our recommendation is the idea of just acknowledging AI bias. By having this framework, it's something to acknowledge. Like what we talked about earlier, oftentimes massive companies will let things like AI bias, rooted in implicit bias, just slide by. It's no big deal. When you're a computer scientist from Harvard, your main goal is making the coolest app you can possibly make, making the coolest AI you can possibly make. Oftentimes when you have this huge goal, you lose sight of the tinier things. We believe those tinier things aren't so tiny, right? So just having this framework isn't necessarily saying, oh, we should follow this rule. By following our framework, by following our rule, you're embracing the idea of being a diverse company and upholding different perspectives.
So why don't we just wait 6 months and see how it goes for New York?
That's a great question. We know that the legal environment's rapidly changing, right? We predict that even within 6 months, New York might not be the only city that has this framework. For example, if you operate mainly in California, the legal environment could adapt. You want to make sure you're on the forefront of this field. Another thing I wanted to mention is that the European Union has already released their framework for dealing with auditing artificial intelligence. And if your companies operate within Europe, you know it's pretty hard to deal with the European Union. You want to make sure you're ahead of the game, especially when it comes to the EU and other international laws that are similar.
Anybody else? You made it. Good
Very
job.
well
You
done.
guys did a good job.
Thank you.
Feedback. Rochelle, you want to start?
First of all, it's a very complicated subject tonight. You guys, that is a skill that will stay with you to make complex things simple to people who don't understand. Nabil, for you, I don't know if it was nerves or it was technology, but you had your slides memorized, but you kept looking at them. Yeah. Everybody else like made eye contact with us and talked to us, but you kind of kept looking back at your slides. It's a little thing, but and then my other question was the finance slide.
Mhm.
Yeah. Was finance cost avoidance?
You meaning like did we purposefully leave out figures like that?
Yeah.
It was pretty tough, so we didn't
I'm
want
not
to.
supposed to ask you a question, but that was just
Yeah, we didn't want to come up with some figures that necessarily weren't rooted in fact. We wanted to make sure everything we were presenting was at least you could draw it back to something. So we had the Workday lawsuit. Unfortunately for us, there's so many lawsuits that have been, they haven't been taken to trial, but they're about to be taken to trial. So it would have been nice if some of these lawsuits had been at least settled or taken to trial. But yeah, so we wanted to base it off of what's happened in other industries. Like I said, Facebook with their biometrics lawsuit, they lost $400 billion on that, and that's about what you could expect. But it's such a different legal context that we didn't want to just say, you're going to lose $400 billion, because it could end up playing out completely differently.
wasn't supposed to ask you a question, but thank you
No,
for
no, yeah,
answering
you're
that.
good. I mean, it's something that we were considering while we were making the slide deck.
Yeah, I wanted to applaud your mastery of a really difficult subject,
Thank you.
and also for your extraordinary patience in dealing with questions like mine. That's a virtue, to be able to deal with a tough audience. Good job.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'm impressed that you took on such a heavy, this is like one of the heavy subjects
Yeah.
today. And something I really appreciated was that impact ratio. I feel like I learned something because I, can maybe guess what the impact ratio means, but I appreciate that you broke it down. I would have liked to see us like a specific, example, like this is how Meta kind of dropped the ball, and how many people got fired, and how much came out in the settlement. I think you said maybe just now it was 400 billion.
For the biometrics lawsuit,
400
yeah.
billion. And then also, technical difficulties, you handled that very calmly. I've done a lot of public speaking, and I've had the lights go out on me and stuff, and the thing that's always nice to remember is as soon as you go in the door, you're like on stage. So even if the stuff isn't working, you can start with something that doesn't necessarily need a slide, like maybe
Right.
going into the executive summary. So, it's, use that time to your advantage, and it's okay if there are technical difficulties.
Right.
'Cause they're kind of really always will be.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, most of what I would have to say in terms of feedback has been said. I thought you guys did a great job. Same thing about the financial part. I just would have wanted more numbers, and you can state your assumptions and put some numbers up there to help us know what we would be facing if we implement your four-step plan. And the only other thing I would say, I mean, you guys know your stuff. I would just like stand in your confidence, right?
Yeah.
I mean, clearly have it. You're a great team. You know what you're talking about. You're passionate about it. And then once the light is on and you're going, just like be confident and let that shine through. But great work. I loved it. Really good job.
Thank you.
How do you feel about it?
Glad that the 25 minutes over. Now we need to work on the 10-minute a little bit more, but yeah, I feel like I'm pretty well.
It was a good time too. Yeah, enjoyed it.
Good luck
Good
tomorrow
job.
with the
Thank
Yeah.
you.